Good morning. I want to thank you for being here with us for this lesson upon the first day of the week. I hope that you will forgive me for whatever I'm holding in my mouth to keep from coughing. And if I sneeze or my nose runs, it's part of trying to get finished with a cold this week. I want us to think this morning the importance of motive. Where does my motive lie? What does it look like? Why is it here? And we're still in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew, the 6th chapter, verses 1 through 6, or 1 through 18. But before we start that, I want us to read the last verse that we read last week in the lesson, Matthew 5:16. He said, "Let your light shine before others, so that they might see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." We ended the lesson last week with that particular verse. And the thought is to let Christ shine through my actions. Mankind often finds himself wanting to be seen and praised for his deeds, for who he is, for what he has actually thinks that he has done. And they often make great fanfare of their works in all parts of their life. But it is often that one takes the same approach with their service to God, with that which is their giving to God. As we read the first 18 verses of Matthew 6, Jesus elaborates on the thought. We see Jesus bringing a lesson on the motive and the hypocrisy that existed at that time and still exist. Professing one thing and being another. Of self-righteousness before man is what he's speaking of today. With the idea of putting myself before everyone else somewhat. In Matthew 6, 1 through 18, he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that in giving it may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you praise, you must not be like the hypocrite. When you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites. For they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and in the street corners, that they may be seen by others. Truly I say to you that they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows that what you need before you ask him. Pray then like this: Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." Jesus presents three forms of service to God where hypocrisy shows itself, seemingly referring to the actions of the Pharisees. We later see this thought used toward them, bringing out the hypocrisy. In Matthew, the 23rd chapter, in verse 27-28, he said, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanliness, so that you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you're full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." I want us to think about what he's saying. And so often we look at someone and we see them, they're doing such a beautiful job at whatever they're doing. And then when it's all said and done and finished up, and you come back and you look, and maybe your own construction or something, you begin to look at everything that's there, and you see the corners that are cut, the simple things, the things that are done, simply looking to finish a job and being better than anyone else. It looks good, but it won't work. And this is the thought that he's putting before them. What they're seeing looks good, but it's not fitting what God knows of the heart. And although Jesus uses those subjects of giving prayer and fasting and goes into some instruction in doing those things, I want us to focus on the teaching he brings out in the text. So often we get hung up in the little things that are there. I may come back and look at this idea on prayer, but I want us to look at what he gives in the text. You see, motive is everything. Where is the heart? Is it on God or on self? Am I looking to please God, or am I looking to make myself feel as though I am being honored or I'm doing better than anyone else? I'm standing before people and hearing the praise. In chapter 6, verse 20 says, beware of practicing righteousness before the people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Who am I practicing these things for? It's just for show? Or am I doing it in earnest for God and to God? This idea of giving alms. He said, thus, when you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly, I say to you, they will receive the reward. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And so often we get tied up in these examples that are there. He's saying the trumpet, whether literal or just an example, does not matter. It's the idea of intentionally making oneself, or making known, or making exhibition of one's act of giving. It was done, these who performed in this manner did it for the purpose of their own personal interest, for being uplifted in their own earthly place. If one is to serve God, the act, in the act, the thought is to do quietly without display, in quietness of spirit, honoring and glorifying God. And so often we hear people say, well, I don't do things. I don't tell anybody about them. I don't do it. And that's right. But this idea of giving anonymously and going through all of those jumps, hoops and things is not what God's saying. Or what Jesus was saying. He's simply saying, don't give for exhibition. Where is the motive at? Yes, give quietly. Give to that one that's in need without making fanfare, without doing what's needed to be done, without making pretense in front of everyone. Simply come to him alone and say, here, I hear you are in need. Take this. Don't worry about paying it back. Just take it and do what you have to do. And so often people make great fanfare, or they go about and they tell everybody, well, I give him so much and I expected him to do this and he didn't do it. See, we're looking for someone, we're looking to bring ourselves above everyone else. And then he goes into prayer, and he brings out prayer in some of this prayer fairly elaborately. But in chapter 6, 5 through 8, he said, when you pray, you must not be like the hypocrites, for they love to stand and pray in the synagogues and in the street corners, and that they may be seen by others. And truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not heap up empty phrases as the Gentiles do, for they think that they will be heard for their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask. We look at this and he's not talking about praying in a public manner. There are places where we lead prayer. And I want us to think about that for a moment. It's no different than leading singing. If we're in a congregation or a gathering and someone leads prayer, we need to hear that word lead, because each one of us should be participating in prayer. Each one of us should be offering a prayer to God at that specific moment. Maybe this one is there is on Sunday morning to remind of us who is sick, who is hurting, who is in pain, who needs care. That's not particularly what God is talking about, although these men would show up in the synagogues and they would seek out the busiest places that their prayers can be heard in order to call attention to self, and they would pray very loudly. In verse 7, he says, do not heap up empty words. Do not focus on the quantity of words. You see, so often there we find people who are very um, have great ability to speak, and they speak with great words, but with words no one understands as they lead things. And if we're praying to God, it doesn't need to be elaborate. He knows what we're asking for. But I want us to think about that idea. It's not about the quantity of words, but the focus on the quality or the depth of the message in sincerity. In other words, what I am giving to God is seeking of Him. He knows what we need. He knows what we have to have in life. He cares for us. It is often that the simplest prayer offers the greatest sincerity. And Jesus says, rather than go into your room, the King James says, inner chamber, one might say into one's quiet place. You see, prayer is a communication between man and God, and there may be people all around, and yet I can bow my head and close myself off to the world. And no one particularly knows what is going through my mind. But it is much easier to go into a quiet place to be able to concentrate and meditate on those things we're going to say and that which we seek of God. But it is communication between man and God. It is praise and worship. He's not looking for great speeches and pomp, but sincerity. The idea of humbling oneself to Him in realization that we are in need of Him. I listened to a young man, maybe 10 years old, many years ago, and he led a prayer, a very sincere prayer, and he was genuinely speaking to God, talking to God about situations he lived within. Some had not been good, and thanking God for where he was at and the things that were happening, and for the people that he knew around him. And yes, he was leading prayer on a Sunday evening from the pulpit. And when he finished, he was one of these kids that was fairly bashful and laid back, and everybody thought mentally short, and he really wasn't. And a man came to him and he said, well, son, I couldn't hear anything that you said. And he said, I wasn't praying to you, I was praying to God. You see, yes, he was trying to learn to lead prayer in public, and yet he still had this innocence before him, knowing that he was praying to God, that it wasn't about seeking man's okay. It wasn't about seeking man's praise. You see, man has nothing to give one who is seeking attention other than empty praise. That's it. Then he goes into fasting. 6:16 through 18, he says, and when you fast, do not look gloomy at the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they receive the reward. But when you fast, anoint your head, wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Fasting is not something that is practiced on a large scale among those who worship God. There are some religions that are more firm about this than others. And it's a practice by many religions around the world, and in times of old, it was a common practice of the Jews. They were known to do elaborate things to bring attention to their fasting. We find no place where God or where Jesus commanded the believer to fast, nor did he condemn it. He simply says, for that one who fasts, there are times when one may do without. He may get up of a morning and do without his meals for the day and give himself over to God in prayer and meditation. The idea of emptying oneself of worldly wants and reaching for things, just simply to meditate on God's word, to pray, to seek him. There's nothing wrong with that I can find. But he says, do it in a manner. Do it in a manner that no one looks to you seeing you fasting. They would mess up their hair. They would look gloomy. They would act as though they had not had a meal in months. And put on a performance so that it might be known that they were fasting. However, for that one he says to fast, he says, offer no outward appearance of fasting nor bring attention to it. If one fasts, do it with the right motive. It is an act between that one and the Father. You see, so often these things he's talking about is an act that is between a man and the Father, or that one and the Father. He sees the things we do. He understands who we are. He knows what we need. He knows what we should be doing. He's willing to give us that which we need to accomplish those things. I don't want us to listen to some statements, and I want us to think about this idea when I have difficulty in doing these things as I should, or as I began to do one of these things, a service to God, that I might go to him in prayer and seek him. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, we hear Paul as he speaks to the Thessalonians. He makes a statement of himself and those who are teaching with him. And this is the thought and the idea of what he's trying to tell us in Matthew. Chapter 2, 1 Thessalonians 2, 10 through 14, 4 through 10. He said, but just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with pretext for greed. God is witness, nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ, but we were gentle among you, like the nursing mother, taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also ourselves, because you had become very dear to us. This idea of giving of self. You see, when I offer giving, or when I'm giving to the needy, that's offering self. When I am praying to God, that's offering self. When I am fasting for God, that is giving of self. It's a sacrifice of me. It's easy for man to see himself doing the work of the Lord and doing it for the wrong motive. Man is weak. Proverbs 16:2, it says, all the ways of man are pure and in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. You see, I can be doing things and believe that I'm doing them for the right reason, because man believes in his own eyes that they're pure. But the Lord weighs the spirit. The Lord sees the real heart. He knows who I am. We ought always be willing to call upon God. We ought always be willing to call upon God, seeking that we might know that what we are doing for him is in the right manner. There's a prayer of the psalmist. It is a difficult one, but it's one we need to think about. It's one we need to take hold of. and try to live by, seeking God. In Psalms 139, verse 23 through 24, he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts." Now, I want us to think about that. And we're saying, I'm going to give myself over to you to open up. I want you to see the can of worms that are there and tell me, am I right? Am I living where I'm supposed to be? Help me see. God can already see those things, but me offering myself to God for that reason. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. You see this idea of seeking God, knowing that man is weak, knowing that each one of us is weak, and we strive and we follow after our own selves far too often. He says, "Search me. See those things that I should not be doing. See the way I'm acting, and lead me in your way. Lead me in the way of God." You see, it make a big difference. Help us to understand that it's not about me, it's about God, and if it's about God, it's about His people, all people. About giving them the word, about helping them see the Lord. We have to go back, we have to remember that all these things, we do them in a correct manner. If we do them in a correct manner, He says, "Let your light shine before others so that they might see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." He's not talking about hiding ourselves as we seek to do the word and do His will. He's talking about doing it in such a manner that it's in quietness. It's without exposing anyone as much as possible. But the knowledge that people see us doing good, those people outside see us doing good, that they might glorify God, not man, not man. In everything we do, we must consider why we're doing it. Is it for God, or is it for my own selfish reasoning? James, the fourth chapter, starting in verse 6, he said, "But he gives more grace. Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourself therefore to the Lord. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep, lest your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourself before the Lord, and he will exalt you." You see, this is the whole point. To make the mode of looking to God, humbling myself to God, seeking to do His will, seeking when I pray, when I give, when whatever I do, that is not an act of selfishness. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? To say an act of selfishness, I'm giving to somebody else, but it's an act of selfishness because of what it does for me. No, I'm supposed to be living my life for God, seeking to give Him my all, humbling myself to Him, letting Him correct me, letting Him show me what's right, how to do it in the correct manner. Find that place that's quiet between me and God and seek Him to help me know the way and to keep my motive pure before Him. I want to thank you for bearing with me this morning. I appreciate you being here. I hope that you find something in this lesson that will help you look further toward this idea of seeking God, doing His will, humbling yourself to Him, working to make sure that the motive that you present before people is about God. I want to thank you for being here today, and may God bless.